There are moments when grief seems quiet. You wake up, you make coffee, you answer messages, you go through the day, and for a while, life feels almost ordinary again. Then something happens. A song begins playing. A familiar scent appears. You pass a certain street. Someone says a name. You find an old photograph, and suddenly, without warning, grief is no longer in the past. It is here, now, as strong as it was months ago, sometimes years ago. And in that moment, many people ask themselves the same frightening question: why am I back here again? But grief does not return because you have failed. It does not necessarily mean you are moving backward, and it does not mean all your progress has disappeared. Often, it means something much simpler. Memory opened a door. Welcome to episode 2 of The Psychology of Grief. In our first episode, we explored why loss changes us so deeply. We looked at grief not only as sadness, but as a response that can affect memory, identity, expectation, routine, the body, and the way we understand the world. Today, we are going deeper into something almost everyone who grieves eventually encounters: the wave. The sudden return. The moment when grief seems to arrive from nowhere. And once we understand why this happens, those moments can become less frightening, because grief may feel unpredictable, but it is not always random. Why the mind remembers. Before we do, human memory is not simply a filing cabinet. We do not store experiences as isolated facts. Memories are connected to places, sounds, smells, seasons, routines, people, emotions, and physical sensations. That is why a song can instantly transport someone back 20 years. Why the smell of a certain meal can remind you of childhood. Why a particular street corner can make you think of someone you have not spoken to in decades, and when a powerful relationship has been lost, those associations do not disappear. They remain woven into memory. This means grief can sometimes be triggered before we consciously understand what caused it. You may feel a sudden heaviness, a strange emptiness, an unexpected sadness. Then, several minutes later, you realize the date, or the song, or the place, or the memory. The emotional system recognized the connection before your conscious mind put words around it. This is one reason grief can feel as if it comes from nowhere, but often somewhere inside the experience, there is a thread. Grief is not a straight line. One of the most damaging expectations people place on themselves is the idea that recovery should move steadily forward. Better today, better tomorrow, better next month, and eventually finished. But emotional adaptation rarely works in such a neat direction. You may have a good week, then a terrible afternoon. You may feel peaceful at a family gathering, then unexpectedly cry in the car on the way home. You may laugh with friends and later feel guilty for laughing. You may believe you have accepted what happened and still wake from a dream wishing everything were different. That does not mean the healing was false. It means grief, and healing can exist at the same time. Progress does not always look like fewer emotions. Sometimes progress looks like becoming more capable of surviving them. That is an important distinction. The ocean is a better metaphor. People often describe grief as waves. There is a reason the metaphor works so well. At first, the waves may feel enormous. They arrive frequently. There is very little space between them. You barely recover from one before another hits. Over time, something often begins to change. The waves may come less often. There may be more distance between them, and you may become better at recognizing what is happening when they arrive. But the ocean has not disappeared. A certain anniversary may bring a large wave, a family gathering may bring another, a song, a hospital, a holiday, a familiar chair. and some waves may surprise you. The important thing is that the existence of a wave does not mean you are drowning again. You may now know how to stay afloat. That is growth, even when the emotion still hurts. Anniversary. Reactions. Dates can carry extraordinary psychological weight. Birthdays, wedding anniversaries, the date someone died, the date a relationship ended, the first holiday without someone. Even seasons can become associated with loss. Sometimes a person becomes emotionally unsettled before consciously remembering why. They may sleep poorly, feel unusually irritable, become distracted, then suddenly realize this is the week it happened. Our sense of time is deeply connected to memory, so when a date returns, the emotional landscape surrounding that date may return with it. This is sometimes called an anniversary reaction, and it can happen even many years later. The intensity may change, but significance can remain. This is why someone can live a meaningful, fulfilling life and still feel sadness every year on a certain day. Those two realities are not incompatible. When ordinary objects become emotional, grief attaches itself to ordinary things. A coffee cup, a jacket, a voicemail, a favorite chair, a recipe, a toothbrush that should no longer be there. These objects are powerful because they belong to the everyday world. They are not dramatic memorials. They are evidence of ordinary life, and sometimes ordinary life is what people miss most. Not the major events, the small routines, the voice from the other room, the question asked every morning, the sound of keys in the door, the familiar complaint, the habit that once irritated you and now feels precious. Loss often changes the emotional meaning of mundane objects because those objects become connected to attachment. What was once ordinary becomes a symbol, and symbols can carry extraordinary emotional force. Why dreams can feel so real. Another experience many grieving people report is dreaming about the person they lost. Sometimes the dream is peaceful, sometimes confusing, sometimes so vivid that waking becomes painful. For a few seconds after opening your eyes, the world may feel wrong. The person was just there. You heard them, you spoke to them, then reality returns. Dreams draw from memory, emotion, expectation, and experience. And when someone occupied a significant place in our lives, it should not surprise us that they continue appearing in the mind. The experience can be comforting for some people. For others, it reopens pain. And sometimes it does both. What matters is understanding that emotional reactions to these dreams are not evidence that something is wrong. They are another example of how deeply attachment is represented in memory. The guilt of feeling. Better, there is another kind of wave that receives less attention. Sometimes grief returns not because of a painful memory, but because of a happy moment. You realize you have gone several hours without thinking about the loss. You laugh. You enjoy dinner. You travel somewhere. You begin a new relationship. And then guilt arrives. How can I be enjoying myself? How can life continue? Does this mean I am forgetting? This can create an emotional trap. If you suffer, you are in pain. If you feel better, you feel guilty. But healing does not betray the person or life you lost. Joy does not cancel love. Laughter does not erase memory. And continuing to live is not evidence that what happened mattered less. This is especially important, because grief can create an unconscious loyalty to pain. A person may begin to feel that remaining sad proves the depth of the relationship. But suffering is not the only evidence that someone mattered. Memory is evidence. Influence is evidence. Love is evidence. The way you changed because of them is evidence. You do not need permanent pain to prove permanent significance. When the wave is stronger than expected, sometimes a person understands all of this and still feels overwhelmed. A trigger happens, the emotion comes back, and suddenly they are exhausted, angry, numb, or deeply sad. The natural reaction may be resistance. No, not again. I cannot do this today. Resistance is understandable, but sometimes fighting the emotion adds another layer of suffering. Now there is grief and frustration about grief, sadness and shame about sadness, longing and anger about longing. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this immediately?" a gentler question may be, "What just touched the memory?" That shift can help turn an overwhelming experience into something understandable. Perhaps it was a date, a place, a song, a conversation, a dream, fatigue, loneliness, or simply a memory that needed no obvious invitation. Understanding does not eliminate the emotion, but it can reduce the fear around it. The wave will change when grief returns strongly. One thought can be especially useful. This feeling has arrived before, and it changed, not necessarily disappeared, changed. Emotions move, they rise, peak, shift, soften, return, transform. This is difficult to remember when you are in the middle of an intense moment. The mind tends to treat the present feeling as permanent, but grief itself teaches us otherwise. There have been days that felt impossible, and somehow they became yesterday. There have been nights that seemed endless, and eventually morning arrived. This does not minimize suffering. It simply reminds us that emotion is dynamic. A wave is powerful partly because it moves. We learn the shape of our own grief over time. Many people begin recognizing patterns. They discover which situations are difficult, which holidays feel heavy, which people are comforting, which conversations leave them drained, which memories bring pain, which memories bring warmth. They begin to understand their own grief, and that understanding creates something important: preparedness. You may not be able to prevent an anniversary from arriving, but you can know that it may be difficult. You may choose not to overload the day. You may spend time with someone safe. You may visit a meaningful place. You may allow yourself to remember deliberately instead of being surprised by the memory. This is not controlling grief. It is learning how to live alongside with it. Grief changes, but attachment can remain. This leads us to a deeper truth. The goal of grief is not necessarily emotional detachment. For a long time, people sometimes assumed healing meant letting go completely. But many contemporary approaches to grief recognize what people have always intuitively known. We often maintain an inner connection with those we have lost. We remember their advice. We repeat their expressions. We tell their stories. We cook their recipes. We notice ourselves behaving like them. We imagine what they would say. We pass their values to younger generations. The relationship changes form, but influence can remain, and this may explain why waves of grief continue. The attachment has not been erased, it has been transformed. The question is not, why am I still grieving? Perhaps a better question is, what does this moment reveal about what mattered? The song hurts because it belonged to something. The anniversary hurts because there was a history. The empty chair hurts because someone once occupied it. The dream hurts because the bond was real. Seen this way, the wave is not merely an interruption, it is also information. It tells us where attachment lives, where memory lives, where meaning lives. Of course, that does not make the pain easy, but sometimes understanding the source of pain changes our relationship with it. We stop interpreting every emotional return as failure and begin recognizing it as part of adaptation. There is no deadline. This is worth saying clearly. There is no universal date when someone should stop having grief reactions. A year is not a magical boundary. Neither is 5 years. Neither is 20. People can build rich lives while still occasionally missing someone deeply. The presence of grief does not necessarily mean the absence of healing. Sometimes healing is visible precisely in the way grief is held. Early grief may fill almost the entire emotional landscape. Later, life can expand around it. Work, friendship, love, curiosity, purpose, travel, family, humor, new experiences. The grief remains somewhere within the larger life. It no longer occupies every room. When grief needs more support, there is also an important difference between grief that remains painful and grief that leaves someone persistently unable to function. Some people experience severe, prolonged grief that continues to dominate daily life for a long time. When intense yearning, emotional pain, difficulty accepting the loss, or inability to re-engage with life remains overwhelming and persistent, professional support can be helpful. Seeking support does not mean someone has failed to grieve properly. Grief can be natural and still become difficult enough to require care. Human beings are not meant to handle every form of suffering alone. You are not back at the beginning, so when the next wave arrives, remember this: you are not necessarily back where you started. You are meeting the loss from a different place in your life. You may know more now. You may have survived things you once thought you could not. You may have developed new routines, new relationships, new strength. The emotion may feel familiar, but you are not exactly the same person who first experienced it. That matters. Progress in grief is not proven by never hurting again. Sometimes it is proven by knowing that pain can return without destroying everything you have rebuilt. And perhaps that is one of the quietest forms of courage, to know the wave may come and still keep living near the ocean. In the next episode of The Psychology of Grief, we are going to explore a kind of loss that often receives far less recognition. The grief nobody sees, the grief of estrangement, divorce, lost health, retirement, a future that never happened, a relationship with someone who is still alive. These losses can be deeply painful, yet sometimes the world does not even recognize that a person is grieving. And when grief is invisible, it can become especially lonely. If this episode helped you understand your own experience, subscribe to Wellness Hubnest and continue this series with us. And if a wave comes unexpectedly, perhaps instead of asking, "Why am I back here?" try asking, "What did this moment remind me of?" Because sometimes grief is not pulling us backward. Sometimes memory is simply reminding us that something mattered.